All right. We got chapter 14 now this week, the Division of Labor and Manufacture. So, just a quick note, get it out of the way. Manufacture in this case. Oh, let me share my screen with you. There we go. Okay. Manufacture in this case means basically making stuff by hand. I know the colloquial version is well, yeah, mainly like just kind of just generically means like making stuff. Um, but specifically, I think what Marx is mentioning with manufacturers, making stuff by hand, handicrafts, I guess is another way of putting it. That's sort of what he's talking about. So, he's going to start breaking down the origin of manufacture to start. He says it starts in two ways. Number one, that you have a bunch of workers all in one workshop, all under the control of a single capitalist, and all these workers belong to different independent handicrafts. Then, through those whose hands a given article must pass on its way to completion. Okay, so first version of manufacturing, a bunch of different workers, they're all do different stuff, and they're all contributing to the making of one probably larger, more complicated article or commodity. So he uses the example of a carriage here. Obviously, for us, that might be more similar to like a car. I mean, that's I think car and carriage have the same root word basically. So yeah, I mean a car. If you can imagine people hand making a car, uh, yeah, it would take a lot of people with a lot of different skills. You need like metal workers, riveters, welders, um, maybe upholsters or like leather workers if they're doing nice upholstery inside on the seats and so forth. You know, yada yada yada. You need a lot of people, basically a lot of skills. Make a car, and then the second way is it can also arise the opposite. We have one capitalist employing a in one workshop a bunch of craftsmen who all do the same work or the same kind, making paper, type, or needles. And this is essentially the opposite of taking a complicated yet like a complicated task or profession and instead of well you even though it's all like it's kind of all one thing. So the product itself doesn't have that many components, but there's a lot of steps to get there. Yeah, there's one way of thinking of it. So you're basically just you're dividing up the work bits and pieces. And so you might have like a whole group of needle makers or paper makers. Um, but instead of each of them kind of working independently, each one of them is kind of contributing to one step along the process. Um, and yeah, this he's basically saying, you know, this is how you get um, a division of labor over a long enough timeline. You are breaking up. Like I guess those are the two routes, basically, right? And that both of these over the course of history will segment work and manufacture into like smaller and smaller pieces that um, basically divides the labor force into and makes each laborer kind of working on more and more specific tasks. Um, so to kind of wrap this up, it says that the mode in which manufacture rises its growth of handicrafts is twofold. On the one hand, it arises from the combination of various independent trades, to lose that independence and become specialized to such an extent that they are reduced to merely supplementary and partial operations in the production of one particular commodity. On the other, it arises from the cooperation of craftsmen in one particular handicraft that splits the handicraft into various detailed operations and isolating these operations and developing their mutual independence to the point where each becomes the exclusive function of a particular. Um, I guess I'll just keep going. It's a nice conclusion paragraph basically to the first part. So on one hand, you have manufacturer is introducing division of labor into a process of production, or it's further developing that division, um, or it can combine handicrafts that were formerly separate. And so he's basically saying, uh, whatever the starting point was, if you're, as long as human beings are sort of involved, um, whatever your starting point is, we're going to chop the labor up into smaller and smaller pieces to divide labor into more simple parts. And this sort of process of, doesn't matter where you start, but you kind of get to the same point. Again, sort of, at least for me, kind of recalls that same imagery of feedback loops, right? This is like a negative feedback loop. You're sort of, um, no matter where your starting point is, there is a dampening mechanism that sort of ensures that you're returning to some steady baseline. And that baseline here, uh, over some historical period or like within any branch of labor, eventually is going to end up dividing the labor into smaller parts. Um, so yeah, that's basically kind of how the division of labor gets going. So part two here, he's going to talk about the specialized worker and his tools. All right, so we have this idea here. I guess I don't know if this is the first time he's introduced it, but he will refer back to this quite a bit in this chapter and also 15. So we have this idea of the collective work. Constitutes the living mechanism of manufacture, made up solely of such one-sidedly specialized workers. So it's sort of the collective worker is like this big group of workers, and essentially each worker is very, he calls it one-sidedly specialized, but that's, just call it specialized in one thing only. So he says, hence, in comparison with the independent handicraft, more is produced in less time, or in other words, the productivity of labor is increased. So it's great, because basically, instead of like one worker who can do a bunch of different things, which first of all is kind of rare because we all kind of are familiar that like if you want to get really good at something, you're probably gonna have to spend a lot of time dedicated to getting better at it. So like learning those trades, learning those handicrafts. So I think we all kind of intuitively understand that to become a great handicraftsman at every handicraft would be essentially like a lifelong endeavor, right? I mean, to acquire like that many skills, in one person takes a tremendous amount of what we might call like, congealed labor time. Like you're spending hundreds of hundreds, no, what's realistic, thousands of hours, um, honing each of those skills individually, and then by the time you're like a master of all, you're probably old as fuck, and haven't you lost out on your dexterity when you were younger. So point is, much more efficient for they're working at the full economy, collective worker, if every worker only gets really good at one thing and then they just kind of stay at that level for a long time. And then I think also he'll it's not this section. Oh yeah, actually no, it is a section. Yeah. He also talks about how, like, it's easier to pass on those special skills from generation to generation, transmitting from father to son, blah blah blah. Which is pretty cool. Oh, the other thing actually, sorry, I did have one note here I thought was interesting. So this quote, about the, although I don't know if anyone knows why it uses the word muslin instead of Muslims. I don't know if that's some old. I know he's quoting somebody else here. I don't.
I believe muslin is a type of cloth.
Yeah, muslin, because he's also talking about
Oh, okay.
calicos, which is also a type of cloth.
Okay, I missed. Okay, I misunderstood that because I'm like, what are you talking about? Okay, that makes more sense, I guess.
Because
Oh,
he's
that's true.
talking
He's
about
talking about Hindu guy. Yeah, because I was like, is he just being like whoever's I don't know. I was like, I don't know who's quoting, but is the guy he's quoting just like a total like echo? Like, okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah, no, muslins and calicos and piece goods are kind of all in a
Cloths.
category.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, I guess the part that I thought was funny though. Oh, I guess yeah, the other piece goods. No, I like this note here. This line in the quote where it says, "Yet they're produced without capital, machinery, division of labor, or any other of those means which give such facilities to the manufacturing interest of Europe." Um, I don't know. It's funny to me because like when you say that they're produced without capital, that's basically another way of saying they weren't produced for profit. And it's like, aha, you have someone from 1832 saying that like you have these amazing goods that have been um handcrafted, but they weren't made for profit. It's a nice little fun
Without
debunk.
capitalism,
Yeah,
why
exactly.
people work?
Yeah, people don't do anything without a profit motive. Clearly, yeah. Just I thought it was just kind of funny, even though it's really not the most important point, anyways. But yeah. Let's see. Again, on the tools section, um, the productivity of your labor is going to depend on not only how proficient you are with those tools, but your quality of tools is going to matter. So he talks about how like there's all these different types of hammers, for example, that I guess do tons of different are used for hammering lots of different nails or whatever. I guess as a interesting little example there. So suffice to say, worker and his instruments are the simplest elements of manufacture. Okay, that's great. We're gonna look at the whole now. Back to another duality here, the two fundamental forms of manufacture, heterogeneous and organic. So do a little bit of laying out the premise sort of here. So manufacture has two fundamental forms of articulation, which, although occasionally intertwined, are essentially different in kind. However, played very different roles in later transformation of manufacture into scale industry carried on by machinery. Double character arises from the nature of the art produced, which either results from the merely mechanical assembling of partial products made independently, or owes its completed shape to a series of connected processes and manipulations. Okay, so let's see. Hey, look. Oh, I did. That's right. I forgot. I did make a note here too at the bottom of this page. So I skimmed over it a little bit here, but let me rewind for half a second here. Manufacture. So when he's talking about how these tools that people are using, just like okay, so he gives the example of like okay, there's 500 different hammers and they're all specialized for hammering different stuff, right? Um, so he's identifying this like adaptation of tools to exclusive and special functions of each worker. Scroll down to the bottom of the page to this footnote here, and this is where he'll start to introduce some ideas from Darwin, having to do with sort of variation of specialization in the biological realm. And this will kind of come back to this idea in footnote 4, chapter 15. That's the one David Harvey goes into some serious detail about. But to go over this really fast, he says in his epic making work, The Origin of Species, Darwin remarks with reference to the natural origins of plants and animals that as long as the same part has to perform diversified work, we can perhaps see why it should remain variable. That is, why natural selection should not have preserved or rejected each little deviation of form so carefully as when the part has to serve for some one special purpose. In the same way that a knife in the same way that a knife which has to cut all sorts of things may be of almost any shape, whilst a tool for some particular purpose must be of some particular shape. So yeah, I guess there are enough special situations that a hammer can be used that you're going to need a lot of different types of shaped hammers. And I know I definitely have seen a lot of different shaped hammers out there. So I guess there is reason to specialize your hammer usage. But yeah, it kind of just makes sense if you're going to be a generalist or have some like general usage, like knives are just for cutting stuff. Like we all kind of understand it doesn't matter what you're cutting necessarily. Assuming it can be cut by a knife, pretty much any knife will do. Even that's not the greatest example though, because I know there are a lot of cutting implements that are, I would say, more specialized than just a generic knife. So even that may not be the best example. Because I know there's a special type of like fabric cutting knife that it's like kind of a rounded blade. It looks like a crescent moon sort of deal. And I know they use those sometimes to prevent fabric from like sliding around, stretching when you cut it.
Yep, the fabric and leather pizza cutter.
Yeah, pretty much. That's true. And nowadays, well, I guess you're right. Nowadays, you can't just buy like essentially a round pizza cutter-esque blade. But the more old school version, it wasn't even like a wheel and axle. It was just like a big crescent moon shaped blade. You'd sort of like roll it back and forth, sort of. But anyways, yeah.
It still kind of works. I mean, you have your kind of general utility knife, maybe one that you carry, in your pocket or on your belt, and you can use that to cut whatever. But, then you have things like fabric knives or fish knives or bread knives or, very specific things that are, yeah, you could use them for other things, but they're not really great for anything other than the thing that they're made for.
That's why I'm kind of giving Darwin crap, because it's like, I mean, I guess it made sense in the context, but it's like, knives can also get kind of specialized in a lot of ways. I mean, hell, I feel like if you want to intimidate someone and you whip out a pizza cutter, they're going to be like, what the fuck? Like,
on the other hand, if you pull out a butcher knife, they're going to be like, what the fuck, in a very different way.
Exactly. It's two very different what the fucks going on.
But if I'm threatening somebody with a pizza cutter, they might just be afraid because clearly I'm insane.
Yeah, or just in the kitchen. Well, I don't know. There's other knives, I guess.
I mean, there are plenty of sharp objects in my kitchen.
That's right. Very specific pizza-related distress, I guess. You'd have to be essentially wielding the pizza cutter for the cutting of pizza, and then you get pissed off. Anyways, so he goes into a lot of okay, so he's talking about the locomotive again, kind of like the carriage before. This is something with like a ton of different pieces that we're gonna break down into smaller parts, and he goes into pretty excruciating detail of all these different professions basically that kind of contribute to the making of a locomotive, which I guess is interesting to think about. And I know we've kind of walked through this exercise before when it came to commodity fetishism, right? The idea that if you are the final consumer of a product, you aren't really familiar with all the individual steps that led to that product getting made. Nor are you familiar with who actually contributed to the making of it. And so there's this level of disconnect, and he's kind of doing, we've talked about that, right? Where like, okay, if if I buy like a Frisbee from the store, it seems pretty straightforward, like, yeah, it's just a Frisbee, okay, but just like he does here, where you can list out all these different professions that like contributed to that contributed to you being able to buy that Frisbee. There's a lot going on that you're totally not conscious of when you just make a simple purchase. So I don't know, it was reminiscent of that, at least, just breaking down like, oh, this locomotive has all these different bits and bobs that all these people contribute to. So he says this external relation between the finished product and its various and diverse elements makes it a matter of chance in this case, as in the case of all smaller finished articles, whether the specialized workers are brought together in one workshop or not. Subdivided operations themselves may be carried on by like so many independent handicrafts as they are the cantons of Vaud and Chateau. Yeah, so pretty cool. To think about, I guess, the division of labor making cool big things like locomotives and carriages, buildings, all that cool stuff. All right, what else here? Okay, so to jump back here, it says, insofar as manufacture combines scattered handicrafts, it lessens the space by which the various phases of production are separated from each other. And also, the time taken in passing from one stage to another is shortened as well, and so is the labor by means of which these transitions are made. Another good point here, I know this is also something that David Harvey mentions, maybe in the videos, but also in the Contradictions of Capital book that I've read. So David Harvey's usually like keyed into this type of stuff a lot, having to do with space and time. And this again has to do with why like capital specifically sort of latches on to manufacturing, and eventually, as we'll see in chapter 15 more detail, why manufacturing gets sort of turned up to 11, so to speak, with large scale machinery, is this reduction of space and time, and then of course like the time it takes to get places or move stuff is also shortened. So all this has to contribute to basically increasing velocity, or increasing your speed of production, your rate of production. So again, this has to do with increasing productivity over time and wasting. You're not wasting as much time. So I guess if you think about it, right, a typical worker who is making stuff in a factory, if they have to spend time waiting for a shipment from like the factory next door to get there, like, oh, we're waiting on these parts, right? I mean, maybe some of you are familiar with this, where, oh, we're waiting for this order to get in and I can't really do my work until the order gets here. Like, that's usually a problem from a capitalist perspective. That is, downtime is no good. Downtime means we're not producing surplus value. For capitalists, that makes them sad. So they don't want that to happen. They'd rather get all the manufacturing done in one space, if possible, so that you nice and close to one another. You can kind of just pass those products along. This has been very much streamlined in the modern day. You've got things like conveyor belts, which make sure the products are just literally continuously moving through a manufacturing process. I'm using manufacturing maybe in the more modern sense of that, but yeah, definitely an interesting note there. And then again, I guess to there's a nice summary. From the standpoint of large-scale industry, this requirement emerges as a characteristic and costly limitation, and one that is inherent in the principle. This is we'll come back around to this idea in 15 more in the next couple weeks, but yeah, really accelerating your rate of production is pretty much what productivity is all about. So next got here real quick, this idea kind of in the same theme of what I was just talking about, right? It's, reducing how much time. Well, actually, let me start here, because we have this call back to the collective worker. So he says the collective worker formed with the combination of the many specialized workers draws the wire one set of tool that I think he's talking about making nails. Is that right? Oh, needle. Sorry, very close to nails. So if he's talking about needles, for example, so they draw the wire, straighten the wire, armed, and then you cut the wire, you point the wire, and so on. And he says that because these different stages are used to be successive in time, so imagine one person doing this, you have to do it step by step. Now that you have a lot of people, they can become simultaneous and contiguous in space. Hence, a greater quantity of each commodities is produced in the same period, and the simultaneity is true arises from the general cooperative form of the process as a whole. So yeah, that's that kind of callback to chapter 13 a little bit, talking about cooperation, the fact that, if you have 10 people involved in the process, they can all be working simultaneously. So if they all work for 8 hours, you've effectively accomplished as much as one person would in 80 hours, or probably even more than that. So yeah, this idea of cooperation, great for kind of accelerating your activity, all that fun stuff. This paragraph is so important too. Start here. Every time I see labor time, it's a good thing to check it out real fast. So, the labor time necessary to attain the desired effect in each partial process is learned by experience. Mechanism manufacturer taken as a whole is based on the assumption that a given result will be attained at a given time. It is only on this assumption that the various supplementary labor processes can proceed uninterrupted, simultaneously, and side by side. It is clear that the direct mutual interdependence of the pieces of work, and therefore of the workers, compels each one of them to spend on his work no more than the necessary time. So, this is kind of one of his notes about what socially necessary means. He's kind of getting into coming back around to that idea a little bit. So I'm sure we've all heard one of the, and Marx has already addressed it earlier, but he's bringing this back up, this idea of like, oh, well, if value is socially necessary labor time, then if I just take a super long time, if I'm really lazy, spend a long time making something, it should be worth way more. Marx is saying, well, that, at least in this manufacturing context, that is not going to happen. Like, it's very, very unlikely that, first of all, someone would just kind of wantonly be lazy in the first place and like take way more time than they should, because number one, they're kind of fucking over everyone else in the production line. It's like, what the hell, dude? Finish your work so we can finish ours, basically. But at the same time, yeah, like you're dependent on everyone else around you. get their shit done in a reasonable amount of time. So yeah, there's also the social pressure to actually work at an average pace at the very least. And he says, this is kind of creating continuity, uniformity, and regularity, even in the intensity of labor, quite different than that found in independent handicraft or even in simple cooperation. And we kind of understand this too, like intuitively, right? So when you do have independent handicrafts, like handicraftsmen, handy workers, or making stuff by hand, like nowadays we might call that like artisanal or sort of, I don't know, what's it called?
You
Auteur
get
or
cottage or
industry.
yeah.
Yeah.
Though that has other definitions attached to it, or things that pop up because there isn't a real industry there anymore.
Exactly, yeah. We all kind of understand, right, that those types of products that are handmade, that are crafted or whatever, like basically we understand those are going to be more expensive. And they're more valuable. And we know that because of the labor time expended on it. One person is just pretty much always going to be much slower at producing something than a group of people. It's a pretty simple rule of thumb.
To a degree, we've almost kind of agreed as a culture or a society or as a market that that there are two separate socially necessary labor times, that for which something is mass produced in a factory and that for which is produced by a single person by hand. Because that's really the only way that you can kind of make an argument for those two different prices. And some of that maybe comes down to marketing in certain cases. But I mean, so like a hand knitted sweater is obviously going to cost you a whole lot more than a machine knitted sweater.
Yeah.
And it's because you have this understanding that it's one person doing this by hand, and that there is sort of like one, you know, socially necessary labor time for doing a thing by hand versus doing it by machine, which doesn't negate what Marx is saying, but it does kind of, I'm going to say, introduce a separate wrinkle. Though I feel like to a degree, he like addresses that in literally the rest of this paragraph.
Yeah.
At least where he talks about, where he basically is then contrasting things like forces versus internal planning within a firm.
Yeah, and I guess, yeah. Well, in this case, he's talking about the context of like a big manufacturing. So yeah, he's talking about like the let's see, the labor time expended on a commodity should not exceed the amount socially necessary to produce it, is one that appears in the production of commodities in general to be enforced from outside by the action of competition. Or to put it superficially, each single producer is obliged to sell his commodity at its market price. In manufacture, on the contrary, the provision of a given quantity of product in a given period of labor is a technical law of the process of production itself.
So basically, whatever that process of production is, whether it's by machine or by hand, is going to at least speak to both the quantity that you produce and what you sell it for. And though there's an interplay with market forces, as long as you can, I don't want to say manipulate, but let's say manipulate those market forces to agree that your less efficient means of production somehow adds value, you can get away with that.
Right. And I think if we think about, the example of making the needles, right? Like if your job is straightening the wire with a pair of pliers, Like, how long could that realistically take? A few seconds? Like, I mean,
If
or
it's the thing you
if
do,
you're the
then
guy
absolutely.
if you're the guy who sits there with a big old pair of like pliers and you cut wire into like inch and a half, whatever a standard needle length is. Again, how long could that realistically take? 1 second per needle, right? I mean, it's hard to like spend more than that actually doing it. So I think I guess how I'm interpreting this last part is that with manufacturer, like, he's basically, you could practically calculate how long a thing will take to make if you chop it up into its individual bits and bobs. Each step is like kind of a known quantity of time. Like, I can grab any dude off the street and he can cut this wire in like 2 seconds. Basically, that's how I'm interpreting it, at least. But then he's also saying like, okay, yes. So that's for the internal pressure. Is like the process of manufacturing. It's sort of this internal pressure to get things made essentially as quickly as possible. But then you also have this external pressure from the market itself saying, if you price your things too high, they're not going to sell. And that's obviously a problem. Profit. So you're obliged due to competition, because the assumption is that if you put your prices too high, somebody else will put their prices lower and box you out of the market. That's what he's talking about by competition.
Yeah.
So
I think this is also a point where David Harvey was like, you can literally point to that last sentence as kind of an example of when somebody is like, oh, you can't do socialism or communism because planned economies don't work. And it's kind of like, well, what do you think companies do that are planning out like how many things that they're going to manufacture or how fast they need to manufacture them?
Right. Yeah, it's like if you've ever heard the corpo speak of like, time saving measures or cost cutting measures, anything along those lines, like, they are doing internal planning, right? They have literally calculated like how long things ought to take. They're looking at their books thinking, how can we save time? How can we have workers spend as little time on each task as possible, and that way they can do more of those tasks in a given period of time. It's all about squeezing every ounce of productivity out of workers as possibly can.
So ultimately the question is like, what difference is there, if any, if the corporation is capitalist owned versus state/worker owned?
Yeah, and I think that's definitely one of the more interesting things, right? Is because, like, on one hand, you do have a socialist organization. You could say, well, we should all work quite intensively but only for like a short time, a few hours. And because we're super productive, our machines are great or whatever, we produce all that we need and we take the rest of the day off, basically. That's one way to interpret it. The other way to interpret it would be like, we are productive enough that if we kind of just take it easy at work, and don't push ourselves to the absolute limit, we can also be productive enough to produce what we need and still have free time. I think there's a balance there to be found, right? And I'm sure that, like, in the socialist context, that's something that, well, not, I guess you wouldn't call it like class struggle specifically. It is like at least a form of struggle. I don't know if it has a name, but basically that like still finding that balance between work time and leisure time, or just free time, where we generally agree we don't want to spend any more time working than we have to. as like a general rule. But at the same time, we also don't want to like have grueling, back-breaking labor, even if it's for a short amount of time. That also kind of sucks. Like let's try and get machines to do that if possible. And I think it also, I know in previous book clubs I've brought up this idea of like another kind of classic liberal gripe is the whole like, oh, but who will do X terrible job? Like who will do the dirty jobs? Like who's gonna clean bathrooms? Who's gonna clean sewers? Or I don't know. Fill in the blank of whatever profession they deem is like gross or unworthy or something. And the implication, at least I think what we talked about in previous meetings, the implication in that argument is the whole like but my slaves. It's basically the same argument. It's like, oh, but I'm a liberal and therefore I actually like having marginalized people who are forced into these jobs that absolutely suck. Because they have no other ways of supporting themselves.
But
It's
the
actually
wild thing
a
is,
really insidious argument.
right? But and what a lot of people fail to acknowledge is that while definitely there are people who are coerced into doing that sort of work, there are also people who would choose it.
I'm sure there's some people that would choose them, sure. And I think the other way to think of it is there's also probably, I would say, a lot of room for automation. Automation, or maybe just technology in general that could alleviate a lot of that labor. It's just that is never going to be heavily invested in, because in the capitalist mode of production, why would you? I mean,
as long as it's cheaper to pay/coerce a person to do it, then why would you find a way to do it automatically or find a way to do it better?
Also, why would you solve a problem when you can make money from it? I mean, this is like the fundamental problem the first example I usually will reach for is the basic problem with having privatized healthcare. You're not incentivized to actually treat like ailments when further treatment makes you even more money. I mean, it is completely antithetical to the point of medicine.
I have an absolutely vile freaking conversation I had with an old Pfizer rep back in the mid-2010s. Why would we go about selling cures? We make our profits from maintaining disease states, not curing people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And there's a lot of things I think I would argue can easily be solved with some basic research or some just effort into like improving technology in certain areas that would eliminate a lot of these like unfulfilling jobs that people are like, rightfully or not, I mean, I'm sure it will depend on the context, but jobs that people are generally unhappy with.
Yeah. And of course we're going to, and until such point that we can all get our heads on straight about this, you're always going to see the narrative around things like automation, around these improved technologies that reduce the need for certain jobs as creating unemployment, as opposed to creating pressures for improved working conditions or creating pressures for just improved human circumstances. You kind of saw, especially with like things like automation at fast food restaurants, where you have like the kiosks where you can order at, you don't ever have to like interact with a person, and you kind of see folks being like, oh, see, this is what happens when fast food workers want $15 an hour, they just don't hire people, and they put in these machines and your service is going to be so much worse. And I'm like, well, first of all, I actually kind of like not having to deal with a person, but second of all, who do you think maintains those systems? Who do you think builds those systems? What do you think they're getting paid?
There's only going to be one of them, is the offset.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I'm like, you only have to
Well,
hire like maybe a programmer or two to take the
I
place
mean,
of like hundreds and hundreds of fucking cashiers or
that's, I
something.
mean, that's true. But, I mean, okay, for a big system like that, you don't have one or two. You usually have an entire development team, which, depending on the company, is anywhere between like, okay, one person to a couple of dozen. But for something like that, I would hope that it's more toward the couple of dozen just for robustness purposes.
You might be
There
right. I think in
is.
initial development, I can buy that in initial development
Oh
you have a
yeah,
team, but once you
Yeah,
have the product out there, like once the self
yeah.
checkout
I
line
mean,
machines are out there, you
yeah,
probably have like
once you're doing
maybe
support and
one dude on
updates,
like
you
tech
maybe
support.
have like
uh,
one. Yeah, I mean, but then you have one person for doing like frontline support. You still have somebody who's doing, back end patches. You have somebody who's
Yeah.
doing, hopefully, overall like big updates that get rolled out. I mean, there's still, I mean, kind of
there
going
are
back to that, you don't really know.
there are still people in it, but every time you get a mass push towards automation, the carrying capacity for actual humans in those industries tanks. It just evaporates. I'll bring up a personal favorite here with agriculture, where 100 years ago you have like a 90% participation rate, whereas today you have a less than 1%. The amount of people didn't disappear, it just the amount of carrying capacity for human labor was replaced.
But
Yes, new
again,
industries
again,
cropped up, but the overall carrying capacity lowered.
yeah, but again, the narrative around that is be afraid because your jobs are going away, and not, hey, that basically means that the few job, that eventually the carrying capacity of your jobs is going to dip below such a certain point where either we're just going to have to give up on this sort of compulsive work-based economy thing, or um or what, essentially.
Quite literally, the or what is go and starve in a tent city.
Yeah, that only I'm gonna say that only works so long as it's temporary. People are
Mm,
starving in tent cities for long enough, and shit
you
has a
may,
tendency to go down.
yeah. How old are the tent districts in Skid Row again now? 20, 30 years?
I feel like the argument for that is that it hasn't reached critical mass.
Yeah, it not reaching critical mass is definitely an argument. The point being is, for a significant number of people, it hit that point a long time
Oh,
ago
for
and has only
for
been
sure.
accelerating.
Yeah, no, I guess that, I wasn't clear that it kind of requires both time and numbers. And while there may be pockets where that may be true, I feel like it might not be quite to the point where there's enough numbers for a long enough period of time in enough places for that to uh, have any kind of chance of success as far as putting pressures on things.
We have not recreated Hoovervilles yet.
No,
We've just
no,
gotten
not
very
yeah.
close. And we have a much more aggressive police force now that is hyper militarized, going out of its way to make these unseen and or otherwise erase them.
So it's kind of again one of those points where I point people to the Star Trek Deep Space Nine two-parter Past Tense and the Bell
Mhm.
Riots.
A very poignant pair of episodes called These Were Commonplace Throughout the 21st Century. Every city had one of them, and the people staying here were never here through any fault of their own.
Yep. Okay. So I apologize, grade A. That was a tangent.
No, it's all good.
That's how we end up with these 2-hour
Yeah, typically.
conversations.
Fortunately, though, my next note was quite a few pages ahead, so I'm just trucking along here.
No worries.
He does go through a number of examples.
Yeah, it's I don't know, this is kind of these few pages where I was like, oh my god, please get on with it. Jeez.
Stop world building! God!
Yep. Okay, so again with this idea of the collective worker, so formed out of the combination of a number of individual workers, it's the item of machinery. Is the item of machinery specifically characteristic of the manufacturing period? The various operations performed in turn by the producer of a commodity, which coalesce during the labor process, make demands of various kinds upon him. In one operation, he must exert more strength, and in another more skill, another more attention. And the same individual does not possess all these qualities in an equal degree. This is kind of what I was talking about earlier, I guess. Maybe I got ahead of myself slightly. It's unreasonable to expect one worker to like be great at everything. Like they're super strong, they're super skilled, they're super attentive, blah blah blah. Like that's pretty unrealistic. For example. And then after the various operations have been separated, made independent and isolated, the workers are divided, classified, and grouped according to their predominant qualities. If their natural endowments are the foundation on which the division of labor is built up, manufacture, once introduced, develops in them new powers that are by nature fitted only for limited and special functions. The collective worker now possesses all the qualities necessary for production in an equal degree of excellence, and expends them in the most economical way by exclusively employing all of his organs, individualized in particular workers or groups of workers, and performing their special functions. The one-sidedness and even the deficiencies of the specialized individual worker become perfections when he is part of the collective worker. The habit of doing only one thing converts him into an organ which operates with the certainty of a force of nature, while his connection with the whole mechanism compels him to work with the regularity of a machine. So I thought this was a pretty nice paragraph, kind of summarizing the whole chapter in a way. And I will say I was a little down on this chapter until this paragraph, mostly because I was like, okay, this is sort of Marx's way of basically saying this whole development of manufacture, especially in the capitalist context, is essentially the process of making humans into the cogs in the machine, so to speak. Right? That's at least kind of how I'm interpreting this. Or at least it's the first thing that kind of popped in my brain. The collective worker is kind of the machine, and each of us are all little cogs in it, all doing our little specialized labor, whatever that may be, to make it hum along.
Definitely harkens back to chapter 10 and talking about people working at the machines and essentially being fed or eating while they continue to work, as if you're shoveling coal into the boiler or something like that. And it's kind of another sort of what would you call that in like literary terms? Like a leitmotif, I think is the word.
Maybe.
Kind of like a repeating theme or refrain.
Yeah, I guess motif works. Another kind of tucked in the back of this section, actually, which I thought was interesting also. He talks about how manufacture develops a hierarchy of labor powers. which there correspond a scale of wages. So they're the various operations hierarchy of labor powers are parceled out among according to both their natural and their acquainted capacities. I don't know if Marx will return to this later on, like this whole idea of the hierarchy of he mentions this, which we all know is a little bit of a misnomer, or just basically just not true. That he says there appears the simple separation of workers into skilled and unskilled. Although I don't know, I guess I don't know. Usually when he uses oh, okay, yeah, that's right. So I skipped this part. He's talking about how in every craft, manufacture creates a class of so-called unskilled laborers, a class strictly excluded by the nature of handicraft industry. And if it develops a one-sided specialty to perfection at the expense of his entire working capacity, it also begins to make a specialty of the absence of all development. So he's talking about how like this kind of, I think when he specifically talks about how in every craft it seizes, that makes me think this idea of skilled unskilled labor only happens once capital gets involved, right? And I think the specific reason is capital would just rather pay some people just less, basically. And again, generally when I think Marx is talking about something appears, right, there appears a separation into skilled and unskilled, that should be a clue to us that it's not really the case, right? It may appear that way because capital makes it appear that way, but it's kind of not true, right? And I'm sure, I'm sure a lot of you are probably familiar with the at this point it's almost like a meme of seeing some video of like a worker doing something in some like insanely unique or creative way. Like you see those videos of these people like chopping up fruit or onions or something, and their blade work is like unfreaking real. Which if you contrast that with the very kind of classist and capitalist indictment of like the quote unquote like the fry cook, right, of being this like lowly unskilled laborer type position. And I understand that like the barrier to entry for being a fry cook is fairly low, but the ceiling for how skilled you can become at that is pretty much unlimited. Right, there's a lot of like extremely talented cooks out there, even if they did start at a pretty low level at some point. And so I think it's just this. It's definitely. I think we've all are all pretty like what do I say? I lost my train of thought slightly.
We've definitely discussed before how the separation between quote unquote skilled and unskilled labor is arbitrary. And how even even the First International was impacted by that, as far as French law treating anything that women did as unskilled labor, full stop, regardless of what it was, and how such that even among socialists, the capitalists managed to create a division within them. Because the union worker, the male union workers did not want women doing their jobs, lest that it depressed their wages. But the example I always like to give about quote unquote unskilled work, and like we were saying about like watching maybe like agricultural workers or food processors like cutting up fruit or onions or something like that. in an insane way. I was going through a toll booth, and usually you just go through a toll plaza, you go to the basket, you toss in your change, and you go. But they got a couple of like cashiers on like usually like either end of the toll plaza if you don't have exact change. And so I didn't have, I thought I had quarters in my console. I didn't. And so we're going through, and all we had was cash. So we go through and we have like $1. Toll's like 50 cents. Hand $1 to the toll booth worker, and she has just like a handful of quarters. And with one hand, she takes your dollar, drops in like in a fluid motion, takes the dollar, drops 2 quarters in your hand, even though she's still got like a handful of quarters behind her. And you go, and it was honestly faster than trying to toss 50 cents into the basket. And to this day, that just sticks in my mind of like, as far as like jobs go, there is like the expert, the GOAT in
Yeah.
every job.
Pretty much.
This woman was it. She was a machine.
Yeah, I bet. She's probably already done it like hundreds of times that day alone. So probably
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands over her career.
But like,
Yeah,
it's
it's just
thank
become a
God.
reaction, but a very specialized
I was
one.
gonna
at
say it's
that.
probably
Yeah.
as easy for her as like snapping your fingers. Just
But like, I'd gone through the cashier lines probably dozens of times before that, with different people working, and it was they might have like a stack of quarters on the desk or whatever, and they could still do it pretty quick. But just like watching this woman do it was like a spiritual experience. It was incredibly impressive, such that like that toll plaza doesn't exist anymore, and it hasn't existed in at least a decade, and that still sticks in my head.
yeah, that was the first thing that had me slightly confused. I'm like, damn, since when are tolls only 50 cents?
Yeah, no, this was a
usually way more
long time
expensive
ago.
than that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, this was a very long time ago. This had to have been, gosh, I was still an undergrad, so close to 20 years ago.
Oh yeah. Let's see. Four Division of Labor talk. Let's see. Notes in this section. Oh, right. Okay. Let's pay this one. Okay. So I think David Harvey may have brought this up, but an interesting idea here is the foundation of every division of labor which has attained exchange of commodities is separation of town from. One might well say that the whole economic history of society is summed up in the movement of this antithesis. However, for the moment, we shall not go into this. I guess for a point that he just doesn't want to get into now, like, interesting that he suggests that it is actually extremely important in the history of society. It's like, okay.
I think he does delve into it more in chapter 15.
Yeah, I guess that would. I mean, it's 50. I'm curious, like, I want to say it's later in the book, like in the 20s or something, but there is a chapter eventually, right, where he does get into the whole, like, closure of the commons sort of thing, where this, like, forced a lot of people from the country to move into these manufacturing and product, like, cities, basically.
I mean, because I'm thinking, like, I thought I remember reading, like, in the first section of 15, where he was talking about the evolution of machination going from, like, the water wheel to the steam engine.
Right.
And about how that allowed the transition of industry to move from wherever water was usually out in the country to wherever the heck you wanted to put it, which from a logistics standpoint worked a whole lot better in the city because that's where the people were.
Yeah, and cities typically are founded on rivers or near water sources, regardless.
But there are definitely cities that aren't, typically ones founded later. But
Yeah, I guess
like there are, because there are like a
It's-
number of cities that I can think of in the U.S. that were founded because railroads happened to cross there or something, and there's not
yeah,
a
that was I guess my
decent
first
body of
thought. I
water
was like,
nearby.
the bodies of water thing is not. I guess it's interesting, right? Because like historically, you wouldn't necessarily you'd settle near a body of water because you need fresh water to like drink, right? That would have been your main reason. You wouldn't have been concerned with like water wheels and shit like that.
Right.
And or you just need fresh water for agriculture too. Like maybe you need irrigation, but there's also you can also use rivers for like transportation, boats, shipping, all that fun stuff. So like there's other advantages, but you're right. I mean, especially when you get into like I envision for example like coal mining towns in like West Virginia. Yeah, there might be like a creek nearby or like a very small river, but these are not like major rivers out. They're kind of in the middle of nowhere. These little because what they're doing is they're just putting the workers where the coal is, which is in the middle of the mountains somewhere. Kind of again like there ain't no damn river. Or if there's a river nearby, like I guess technically like northern West Virginia, you have the Shenandoah, but that doesn't even really. I don't know.
I mean,
usually, I
like
don't
the-
associate the
yeah.
Shenandoah with West Virginia, but I guess
No.
my point
Well,
stands.
like a lot of times is and then you have a lot of things with like sharing water rights and all those sorts of wild legal things where maybe you have several towns that ended, that popped up near enough to a river, but it's all the same river.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I'm pretty sure in England they call it. Isn't it called like the Black Country, which is like it basically was the original. Let's see, memory's not going to be great on this. Let's see, because I think the Black Country in England refers to the old like manufacturing hub, basically. I'm looking it up real fast. What if it included like what's it called, Manchester, where Marx was? Because that's where they mined like a shit ton of coal, but also just had tons and tons of
Newcastle.
manufacturing.
Newcastle. And
Yeah, West
another
Midlands.
entirely.
Okay. Yeah.
I knew that. So like, I was listening to a podcast where they were talking about how there used to be a saying about how like you're so dumb or you have like such poor business sense you tried to sell coal to Newcastle, which is basically to say like that's where they mine all the coal.
Yep.
And they don't need you to sell it to them.
Okay, so it's actually a smaller area than I thought it would be on the map. But regardless, yeah. The point is, I think in a lot of those old school manufacturing towns, especially in England, where Marx would have been observing all this jazz, I mean, they are also like miles and miles of handmade canals, like a huge networks of canals for basically shipping, where they would have like basically little barges that would be either probably horse drawn, and then maybe eventually they would have been steam powered. Whether it was being pulled by like a locomotive or just like like a little steamboat, basically. Yeah, like that's the other thing is water. You'd basically build your own river at a certain point, or like network of rivers, basically. Even if you didn't start with one to begin with.
Yeah, but to the original point, he was kind of talking about how definitely Mechanation was limited to being able to be co-located with running water versus being able to stick it wherever the hell you want with steam power if you have like a a coal boiler and all of that.
I just thought it was, I don't know, the reason I thought of that was like it's kind of a funny like inversion, which I know again Marx is a fan of, but it's a funny inversion of like ancient society. You settle on a river because rivers got what you need. In industrialized society, you settle wherever the fuck you want and you build your own river. it's like
yep. And I think to the end that's the point.
All right. More skipping here. Okay, so I think I identified this paragraph of kind of containing the point, so to speak, of this section. So let's jump in here where he says, now it is quite possible to imagine with Adam Smith. In this section, he's roasting Adam Smith quite a bit here. Or it's like a mixture of referencing and roasting, that kind of deal. Now, it was quite possible to imagine with Adam Smith that the difference between the above social division of labor and the division in manufacture is merely subjective and exists merely for the observer, who in the case of manufacture can see at a glance all the numerous operations being performed on one spot, while in the instance given above, the spreading out of work over great areas and the great number of people employed in each branch of labor obscure the connection. But that is what forms the bond between the independent laborers. But what is it that forms the bond between the independent laborers of the cattle breeder and the tanner and the shoemaker? It is the fact that their respective products are commodities. What, on the other hand, characterizes division of labor and manufacture? It's the fact that the specialized worker produces no commodities. It is only the common product of all these specialized workers that becomes a commodity. So yeah, I think this is a nice point here, where I think Marx is drawing the distinction between what Adam Smith was analyzing during his time versus what Marx is analyzing in Marx's time. Right? What Adam Smith was fixated on for his context was like, I guess you might say like a countrywide division of labor. Like, oh, this group of people like gets food for everybody. They're the peasants and the farmers and agriculturalists and stuff. And then you've got like, oh, this other huge group of people all collect like raw materials for everybody. Like they're the coal miners, the loggers, fishermen, etc. I mean, I guess that overlaps strongly with the agriculture, but you get my point. And then you've got like the other group of handicrafts and manufacture, like they take all the raw materials and make shit out of it. And that kind of, again, that may have, whether it was true or not in Adam Smith's time, who knows? But if we just say, yeah, that was generally how it was, Marx's point is that that's still assuming that like each person is doing one entire task all by them, like basically all by themselves. Versus the period of manufacture in this case is you individually are not really producing, let's say, a locomotive, like a big old train. Like, imagine how long it would actually take one person to make a train. It's just not realistic. So indeed, it's not the train. It wouldn't be something you yourself made alone. It was actually the common product of you and all of your coworkers. And again, he's kind of making an allusion here to the common product of, now he says, of all the specialized workers. What have we, Marx has already used the term multiple times, but this idea of the collective worker. Because the collective worker is just a bundle of all the specialized workers. They just all happen to be working on like one thing together. And he's basically saying, he's telling us that this is the big difference between what Adam Smith is analyzing and what I am analyzing. He starts out with the same classic Marx, right? He thinks it's merely subjective, meaning, it's in the eye of the beholder, so to speak. Or in other words, it appears this way. It appears that we're analyzing the same thing, but we're not analyzing the same thing. These are very different types of divisions of labor.
Well, Adam Smith is kind of looking at this division of labor as at sort of a macro level, at the level of entire economies. Marx is analyzing it at the level of the individual firm. But what more, that doesn't really kind of get taken out to its full conclusion here, as far as I can tell, is that this is another one of those spots where Marx is building a foundation for the discussion of the alienation of the worker from the products of their own labor. Whereas Adam Smith kind of assumes to a degree that the laborer still retains some connection to whatever product is produced because, I don't know, it's the product of their region or whatever. Marx says, kind of to a degree, that you're doing this one thing. You're cutting the wire. You're straightening the wire. Whatever. Like, you could be making anything. You're making a needle. You're making a part for a piece of electronics. I mean, whatever. You're making a. It could be anything. You might know. You might know. You might not know. And he does kind of say later on in that same kind of section that, where was that? I was just looking at it. The division of labor within manufacture presupposes a concentration of the means of production in the hands of one capitalist. The division of labor within society presupposes the dispersal of those means among many independent producers of commodities. While within the workshop, the iron law of proportionality subjects the definite numbers of workers to definite functions in the society outside the workshop, the play of chance and caprice results in a motley pattern of distribution of the producers and their means of production among the various branches of social labor. So basically, what I interpret Marx to be saying there is that basically, because you have those means of production concentrated within the hands of a single capitalist, it honestly doesn't matter to a degree what you're doing, and where he's kind of talking about that division out, and that kind of contradiction, or not contradiction, but kind of dichotomy that we'd mentioned before about the character of division of labor in manufacture, where the specialized worker produces no commodities, as opposed to the individual laborer producing a commodity. And there's like a lot of reading between the lines, I think, that needs to happen in that passage on 476, that if this division of labor were to occur within a system where the means of production were owned by the laborers, even if they were just doing this one single task, ultimately that single task results in a commodity that they can still point to as, to some degree, their own. So I feel like it's kind of an important thing to note here that Marx is not necessarily saying that division of labor is bad. It's that the system in which this division of labor is occurring does take away some degree agency and even perhaps a degree of pride in work from the individual laborer.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I guess I didn't make that immediate connection to alienation though, but that is yeah. I like that interpretation. He's kind of again laying groundwork, or yeah, I mean, it's funny because I feel like at any point in this text you could be like, aha, alienation. Just fucking everything is alienating. But yes,
Take
it's
a
a good
page.
point. Yeah. I guess it's kind of the same imagery of like, oh, I'm just a cog in a machine. Like I don't know what the machine is really doing with me. I'm just one gear, you know.
I feel like that's a really good argument for overall transparency at a minimum. And at a maximum, kind of having that again, that literal buy-in, that literal co-ownership, whether you're talking about co-op, whether you're talking about a full sort of socialist structure of industry, where sure all you might be doing is cutting wire all day. That's your thing. You're really good at it.
Yeah,
Cool.
actually, honestly, on the next page is where he does get into that. The difference between like what a capitalist and potentially socialist organization, like main differences.
Yeah.
So
And and that actually might have been what was tickling that.
yeah, actually, I'll go over this part because it's a good follow up.
Yeah.
So it says the division of labor within the workshop implies the undisputed authority of the capitalist over men, who are merely the members of the total mechanism which belongs to him. Him, I think, meaning capitalist here. The division of labor within society brings into contact independent producers of commodities who acknowledge no authority other than that of competition, of the coercion exerted by the pressure of their reciprocal interests. Just as the animal kingdom, the war of all against all, more or less preserves the conditions of existence of every species. The same bourgeois consciousness which celebrates the division of labor in the workshop and the lifelong annexation of the worker to a partial operation and his complete subjection to capital as an organization of labor that increases its productive power, denounces with equal vigor every conscious attempt to control and regulate the process of production socially as an inroad upon such sacred things as the rights of property, freedom, and the self-determining genius of the individual capitalist. It is very characteristic that the enthusiastic apologists of the factory system have nothing more damning to urge against a general organization of labor in society than that it would turn the whole of society into a factory. Yeah. It's this last sentence, honestly, kind of, it's like pointing out that huge contradiction, and also, I mean, it's a contradiction, but you could also just call it like glaring hypocrisy. Because it's like, hey, y'all organize your workshops like these little planned economies, basically. And so when I come along and say, hey, we should do that for everything because that would make everyone's life better, you're like, no, we can't do that, because wouldn't it be terrible if life is like a factory? It's like, no, bitch. Like, I mean, it's only your factory sucks because you're the one benefiting from it. Yeah, you're the one running it.
It's like, yes, it's terrible in the sense that if you're thinking about a factory in the sort of capitalist coercive, you have to be working here and we're extracting every bit of surplus labor that we absolutely can out of you. Yes, that sucks.
Yeah, that's the part that we don't want to duplicate,
Yeah,
if possible.
right. But the whole idea of organizing society in a planned or even semi-planned sense, where you're looking at things as far as what do we project needs and demand to be. Yeah, you can make mistakes on that, and it was a lot easier to make mistakes on that 60, 70, 80 years ago even, you know. But now we have things like, we have insane capabilities for data analysis and for predictive models that large companies rely on every day to determine how much that they need to keep on hand. Like Amazon has to have insane data analysis to be able to have a sense of what do they need to keep in what warehouses to ensure that they can get things to most people in 2 days. Like
Yeah.
the sheer level of logistics required for that and the sheer level of data processing required for that is brain melting.
Yeah, and there's
But
also,
they can do it.
They also have they also got to calculate which orders to throw onto which trucks, for example, to make the most efficient route. That is also some serious math going on.
Yeah. As somebody who did research in that realm at one point, that is some incredibly hard math.
I mean, apparently the algorithms that Google Maps uses to, plan a route from just the simple point A to point B.
Yeah.
Apparently those algorithms were insanely difficult to develop.
They're NP hard at least.
Exactly. And so it's okay, now do that, but you have an unknown number of stops, and you also
you're
need
essentially
to pick...
looking at a traveling salesman problem, which is NP complete. You can get local minima at best from those, but
exactly, yeah. Basically, yeah. I guess that's what I'm getting at. Is these are really, really hard math problems to solve, and they're being at least adequately solved by modern computing. Yeah. So,
and they're doing this at a global scale, so it's clearly possible.
Yeah.
Like a single government could absolutely pull this off. I mean, okay, I'm saying government in the I'm going to say the very platonic sense, as as an ideal, not necessarily government as it exists now in any real sense for the most part.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, the thing that runs the economy.
Government's a bad word anymore. But yeah. And yeah, this is definitely another one of those points where Marx is definitely oh, what's that you say about planning being bad?
Well, wasn't Allende's Chile already trying to plan the economy via computers and whatnot back then?
Yeah, Cybersyn.
Yeah, and then we all know what happened there.
Yeah, the incident with the helicopter.
Yeah, so it's we've proven that we can already do all this planning, even with technology that is 30, 40 years old.
Yeah.
So nowadays we could I'm sure easily map the entirety of human production with if we wanted to.
Between Walmart and Amazon, I'm pretty sure that we're already pretty close.
Well, yeah, but I mean that's just my point.
The other thing I think would be that another prospect, I guess I'll say, that is exciting in the social organization of labor, basically, is the getting away from producing for exchange value and instead producing exclusively for use value. Because I think too many people, liberals mostly. I mean, they've got this idea of like, oh, vote with your dollar, right? And that's your base that is essentially saying like, oh, you should like, attempt to influence market trends by buying stuff or not buying other stuff, so on and so forth. But it's like that has everything to do with exchange value, and very very little to do with use value. Whereas if you had a actual socially planned economy with the intention of producing for use value, then your feedback mechanism, the feedback loop system here has nothing to do with exchange value. It's everything to do with, hey, we need this thing like now, or maybe in the future. Like maybe we should get that done. And so your feedback with the planning, whatever the central planning mechanism is, there would have to be some way of basically sending feedback to it, information, in other words, meaning we're going to have to redirect production or so on to address needs like as they occur. So that's another thing that's kind of it's a interesting problem that's going to have to be solved, but I mean, I think the implications could be really interesting.
Reading this is going to actually end up making me do another grad program in data analytics, isn't it?
Maybe.
I'm going to end up in grad school again. No.
Just you just got to basically, I guess, lie to some hiring committee and be like, actually, I already figured all that stuff out. I just haven't published it yet. Therefore, you should hire me, even without a degree.
Maybe I could rely on the have you seen the Twitter HR whole viral video going around?
No, I guess not.
Where basically they're talking about how Twitter essentially has no HR department right now.
Nice.
Which means that it's insanely hard for anybody to verify if anybody actually worked at Twitter.
Ooh. That's fun.
So do with that information what you will.
Yeah, for a second I was
it's
thinking
almost
like
as if when you firebomb a company, it tends to fuck things up for a lot of people.
That's also a thing that happened, I think, in like the late 90s with Circuit City, when Circuit City went bankrupt.
That's before my time.
Yeah, and don't forget the really weird accountancy mess that happened through Kmart.
Oh yeah.
Because that one was kind of it was more cost effective for them to perpetually keep their inventory in rotation on the roads and mark it as lost goods / never arrived than it was to actually sell it.
That's kind of a different thing, because I was literally talking about how like just like the internal bureaucratic infrastructure of a company evaporates.
Oh.
And yeah.
And apologies.
Kind of, that's a loophole that kind of is something that one could take advantage of, theoretically.
If there's no leadership, there are no leaders.
Yeah. I don't know where that. I don't know how we. I don't remember how we got there from here, or got here from there. But where were we?
Well, I was gonna jump ahead to section 5 here. So going into more detail on the capitalist character of manufacture specifically. So we've got we're going to say that the increased number of workers under the control of one capitalist is the natural starting point, both of cooperation in general and of manufacturing in particular. And then obviously the division of labor makes an increase in the number of workers a technical necessity. Also pretty straightforward. Let's see. So skip. He says how an increase in the variable component of the capital employed necessitates an increase in its constant component too, i.e., both of the in the extent. Why am I skipping? Both in the available extent of the conditions of productions, such as workshops, implements, etc., and in particular in raw material, the demand for which grows much more quickly than the number of workers. The quantities of it consumed in a given time by a given amount of labor increases in the same ratio as does the productive power of that labor through its division. Okay. So yeah, this also kind of makes sense. That your consumption of raw material, for example, would essentially be at the same pace as productivity increases. And indeed, I think that pretty much tracks with, like, for example, CO2 emissions throughout history. At least they've been tracked sometime in the 1800s. I think isn't there a year that's like the most often cited? It's around like 1870, I want to say. Hold on, I'm going to look this up really fast. Maybe it's just 1900. It might just be 1900 that they typically quote.
There
You know what I'm
was
talking about? Like they usually quote like, oh, it's like an increase of so many parts per million since the Industrial Revolution. Like, I can't remember what year specifically they typically cite.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. and, like,
1912, I think, because there's that freaking New Zealand article that goes into it stating that the burning coal, the emissions it put out would create warming effects that would screw up all sorts of stuff. The burning of coal, natural gas, and oil for electricity and heat is the single largest source of greenhouse emissions, from a March 1912 report in the magazine Popular Mechanics.
Yeah, I
So,
think you're right. I think it's mostly the turn of the century that's most often cited. But yeah, I guess my point though is that curve looks an awful lot like the productivity curve for the global economy, which is not too surprising. But hey, you know, even though it may not be the most impressive prediction of Marx's, hey, you got one right there. But he'll go on to say that in other words, the transformation of the social means of production and means of subsistence into capital must keep extending. Yeah, it's basically, he's like, hey, this all comes back around, right? Because capital must grow. That is its purpose. That is what it must do. And therefore, we must keep consuming at a accelerated rate, pretty much. All right, what else here? Oh, talking about the collective working organism as a form of existence of capital. So again, this idea of like, I know Harvey kind of likes to throw this question around a lot in his talks too, of like kind of keeping that in mind. The basic question of like, okay, well, what is capital? So in this context, right, bringing together a bunch of workers to work on something is a form of existence of capital. Like this is one of the things capital is able to do. So yeah, I guess that's one thing to think of, right? Is what capital is. Yeah, so the social mechanism of production, which is made of numerous individual specialized workers, belongs to the capitalist. And hence the productive power which results from the combination of various kinds of labor appears as the productive power of capital. And I think we talked about this last time, right? Where in the cooperation chapter, like this is sort of again that origin of the socialism is when no iPhone meme, right? It's the meme of like liberals they're falling for the appearance of the thing instead of what it really is, right? They're sort of getting stuck in this mindset of like, oh well, because capital brought together the means of production and a bunch of workers, and that they collectively designed, built, and developed this thing we call the iPhone, well then that must be a product of capital and therefore capitalism. And I think what Marx is saying is, in classic Marxist dialectical materialist way, yes and no. Yes, capital did bring a bunch of workers together for the purpose of building this iPhone. And, more specifically to make money off of building it, basically. But Marx would also say that no, capital did literally make the iPhone. The workers literally made the iPhone. And that's kind of the dialectic between capital and labor, like doing some work there. That's why, again, when I tend to think of like, how would I answer this question? If the answer is somehow a little bit of yes and a little bit of no, I don't know. To me, that's sort of thinking dialectically. But yeah, it might appear as if the power of capital did it. And I think even Marx would say, kind of. It kind of greased the wheels a little bit, but let's be real, the workers are the ones who actually made your fucking iPhone. The conclusion being that, no, you don't need capitalism to make an iPhone. Right? Just because it already has in our current timeline doesn't mean it was necessary.
And of course, just like the lack of, I'm going to say, just dialectic thinking results in people wanting easy answers that aren't, that are just a simple yes or no, and not something that's, nobody likes it's complicated.
You could even, I could even say, even without dialectical thinking, it's basically just like very uncritical thinking. It's just very unscientific. It's like I said, it's being deceived by appearances, and like, you're not even getting anywhere past the surface level.
But I mean, I feel like even critical thinking, as we think of it, is itself kind of a very basic form of dialectic thinking. We just don't call it that because dialectics is a dirty word in the capitalist West.
Fair enough. I didn't even really. I don't know if I've ever thought of critical thinking as like inherently dialectic, but it kind of is. Because that's what critical means. Yeah. Is basically you have to be like, assume something is wrong, assume that there is a contradiction, and and try to identify it. Like that is what being critical
Right.
means.
Assume there's a contradiction. Try to find the resolution to that contradiction. Even if that literally means saying, yeah, okay, a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but also neither.
Yeah. Or even if you never get to the resolution, just identifying the contradiction, I think, is a step that most people
Right.
would benefit from.
And so that is always why it has been super hard for me to often make a good argument with somebody, because people just want really quick, simple, concrete answers, and I'm like,
They
it
want
doesn't.
sound bites.
I cannot make it like that. Like, I'm sorry, it's complicated. Like, I'm
I
gonna
think-
have to sit here and give you like a semester's worth of information in 20 minutes,
Another thing
and your
I know
brain is gonna
people
melt.
I know another thing people really hate being told is like, so I will try and point out like, okay, so we have some point of disagreement. And if I can get to the point of saying, well, I believe the thing I believe because I am analyzing this from the perspective of a worker, someone, a member of the working class. Your argument is clearly designed to support the interests of capital and capitalists. And so, like, I am basically left saying, this is the reason me and hypothetical liberal I'm talking to, this is the reason you and I have a disagreement here, is that, I am basically in favor of something that would help the working class, and you are in favor of something that would help the capitalist class. And I say, but you are not a capitalist. And I am left to conclude that you are regurgitating propaganda. And oh my God, does that make people angry?
Oh, absolutely.
Cognitive dissonance is a hell of a thing.
It is a
The
hell of
worker
a
has
drug.
fallen in love with his master.
Yeah, people hate that shit, especially liberals,
Or
because they think because usually, okay, at least with like, let's call them like the quote unquote left leaning liberal, right? They want to think that they're on the side of the working class. They want to think that they're progressive and believe in the right things, but it's like, dude, no. You have been so thoroughly duped. You haven't even begun to think for yourself.
And sometimes you get lucky, and some of them will actually sit there and listen and be like, "Oh crap." But others,
yeah.
even if you're like, okay, I see where you're coming from, and I can maybe, even agree with you, provisionally on these particular points, they're like, okay, I'm just gonna stop there. You agree with me. You're wrong, right? Like, no.
You have missed the point. Airwhoosh noises.
No. It's so hard anymore. I mean, not blanket with everybody, but like if it's somebody that you don't really know, or if it's somebody that you know going into the conversation is going to be somewhat hostile to your position, even if you've known them for years. It is so hard to have intellectual discourse without somebody getting butthurt.
Yeah, pretty much. I still think to this day one of the just pieces of rhetoric that I'm most proud of is getting a like dyed in the wool like MAGA chud basically to agree with the most basic proposition that workers and capitalists have diametrically opposing goals. It's not much, but the fact that he said, actually, I'm pretty sure you're absolutely correct on that. I was like, wow.
A very similar conversation with a cousin over the summer where I was just at this point, I was drunk and ready for a fight. And they were talking about some somebody going on some group or another going on strike or whatever, and I'm like, good for them. And they kind of blinked, and I said, absolutely, and kind of gave the explanation that yes, workers really do deserve to be paid more, and this and that and the other thing. And they just kind of were doing, like, they had this face where, like, they couldn't believe that they were about to agree with me.
Yep.
And then they said that, and then I had the face where I couldn't believe that they just agreed with me. And I'm like, okay, we do have some common ground. If for a moment,
yeah,
we can find it.
I do generally try and go for that approach though, of like, instead of attacking someone immediately by saying like, oh well, you're just dumb, or I think maybe the biggest error you can make is by basically implying that they have like some moral shortcoming, right? Of
Yeah.
like, oh, that belief you hold is immoral. Like, that's one of the biggest turnoffs, I think, for anybody. But yeah, I think actually really trying to identify the exact contradiction of like, okay, this is where I'm coming from and this is where you're coming from, and then pointing out, usually the easiest one you can reach for is like the class lines of along which we disagree, and pointing out that like, hey, assuming you're talking to another person who's like working class, right? Obviously, if you're arguing with the capitalist, like, what do you even save yourself the psychic damage and don't bother? But
stop arguing and grab the ice pick at that point.
Yeah, but if this is someone you're actually like trying to work with and like have a conversation with reasonably, then like, yeah, I think using basically the dialectic method of like identifying the contradiction, exposing which side is which, and then, okay, let's zoom out a second. You and I are on the same team here, basically. So why do we disagree? Well, because I have done the work of deprogramming myself and you have not.
Yeah. Like, yeah, sometimes I will get to the point where it's like, I'm going to fight you over the fact that I will fight for you, even if you think you don't like it.
Oh, yes, that's such a good point. Yeah, that's such a good way of saying it, I guess. It's like, I am trying to help you here. You're making it very difficult.
So that entire conversation just sort of like, I think, kind of broke both of us because neither of us were expecting the other to actually agree, despite the fact that we both knew that we were being completely reasonable. And just kind of just going into it knowing that we diametrically disagree on most things, and they kind of went into it with like the kind of, oh, it's like Fox News is talking about like so and so is striking or whatever, and like that's my first thing where I'm just sort of like, good for them, fight me.
Yeah, it definitely
like,
makes it easier.
Actually.
Makes it much easier to argue with people when you know you're right.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're really going on those tangents tonight, aren't we?
It's true.
It's one of those nights.
It's true. It is. I was gonna say it is one of those nights because I did not prepare super thoroughly for this.
Tonight's train of thought is a Roomba.
In fact, I'll say next week might be even more disjointed because as I get closer and closer to my comps, I will become more and more scatterbrained. But thank God we have a week off, the first week of April, because I will need it.
Like, if we're gonna skip forward, though, I do at least, there is something on 483 that is basically like the spiciest take in the entire chapter, where he starts out quoting Adam Smith: the understandings of the greater part of men are necessarily formed by their ordinary employments. The man whose life is spent performing a few simple operations has no occasion to exert his understanding. He generally becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible a human creature to become. After describing the stupidity of the specialized worker, Smith goes on, the uniformity of his stationary life naturally corrupts the courage of his mind. It corrupts even the activity of his body and renders him incapable of exerting his strength with vigor and perseverance in any other employments than to which he has been bred. His dexterity at his own particular trade seems in this manner to be acquired at the expense of his intellectual, social, and martial virtues. But in every improved and civilized society, this is the state into which the laboring poor, that is, the great body of the people, must necessarily fall. So that actually kind of falls into a degree what we were just talking about, weirdly. And that David Harvey, when he brings this up, asks, to what degree is your ordinary employment corrupting the courage of your mind? Which is to say, if you're so wound up in the work that you have to do, if you're too exhausted after this, or you basically are, in this job that, it doesn't require a whole lot of thought, personal growth, anything like that, you're not, whatever other parts of your intellect tend to atrophy. So you're going to stop asking questions. You're going to stop exercising your ability to discuss things and think about things dialectically, for example. It's going to kind of remove your ability to view your situation objectively, or even, view it from any other point of view than being within it. So, even though he's mostly quoting Adam Smith here, this is one of the few parts of quoting Smith where I feel like he is saying, yeah, no, absolutely, Smith is right here, and he's not completely roasting him.
Honestly, I think one of the best examples of that you have been in a bubble for too long that your mind has rotted goes to freaking Ben Carson, the neurologist. Because, good lord, absolutely brilliant neurologist, but somebody drank the pool water and it definitely rotted their brain.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting quote, and I think it does connect back to one of the scariest parts of capital to me is because of the implication that capital, when we talk about capital has to constantly grow, expand, all that gnarly stuff, what that also implies is that it's devouring your free time, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's its constant goal, is to just, even if it's not consuming your time by forcing you to work, it can also consume your time by making you consume, which is just as important to capital as the I know in volume 1 everything is about production, right? But the other side of the coin, so to speak, in valorizing capital is consumption. You have to eventually buy the thing and then consume it. And ultimately, capital is all about consuming free time, or just time in general. And yeah, you're right. The more free time gets devoured by either your work or your consumption time, that's just less time to be a normal ass human being, pretty much. So yeah, that's definitely one of the most terrifying implications to me.
And taken to its logical conclusion, you can even apply that to the education system, where, yeah, you're learning, but first of all, basically you're just learning how to be a good worker. You're not, again, learning necessarily how to think critically. You're not necessarily learning how to learn. which are things that you can do in your free time. But ideally, you, as the ideal programmed worker, have no free time. You go to work, you make the money to reproduce your labor, you make the surplus value for your employer, you go home, you consume, whether it is you're consuming your dinner or you are consuming what is on TV, or you are spending your free time in like the only, third place that there is anymore, which is usually some kind of place where you're expected to spend money. You have little time or energy to enrich your own mind. You don't necessarily care to, it's like if you're gonna read, it's gonna be perhaps something mindless, that you're not necessarily going to have to think terribly deeply about, that you're not necessarily going to learn anything from. It's like if you're gonna go online, you're gonna browse your social media. You're not maybe gonna read anything particularly interesting or incisive aside from, maybe your aunt's latest life hack. And it's like the entire expectation, the entire system is built to kind of keep you in this bubble and in this cycle of produce, consume, produce, consume, produce, consume, where you do what Adam Smith said and Marx quotes entirely unironically, and turn yourself into as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become.
Yeah, it's definitely a sad consequence for sure. Another thing people probably really, really, really don't like being told, but might benefit from being told.
Just a little bit.
But hey, the first step is acknowledging that you have a problem.
Yeah. Also reminds me of like when I like if I'm like meeting from someone for the first time and I'm trying to just figure out who they are, like, okay, going through the process of like, all right, what's this person's deal? One of the most like more depressing things is like hearing someone describe themselves in terms of the content they consume.
Oh yeah.
Or it could also be the food they consume. Basically it's like if you define yourself based on consumption habits, like
most people will define themselves either by the work they do, or the stuff they consume. And I'm guilty of that myself. I mean, I will tell anybody, I'm like, I will make anything eventually about, because like my two biggest outside of workplace interests are space, both spaceflight and astronomy, and Star Trek. So yeah, I do define myself to a degree in the stuff I consume.
And I don't think it's necessarily like
about that.
I don't blame anyone for doing that. That's why I call it like it's somewhat sad to me. Because that is, if we are what we do, if the only two things you're doing is, like you just said, either producing or consuming, that of course you're going to define yourself based on that. Like, it makes sense. That is what you do with your life, is you are consuming a bunch of stuff, or you're producing something.
Yeah, like I can't talk because I do the exact same thing.
Right. Yeah, that's what I mean by like it's definitely kind of sad that, because it's hard for me, especially now that I'm a grizzled, rusty Marxist, that I'm like, all consumption is kind of under one giant umbrella to me. Like, okay, I watched this TV show versus this other one. I'm like, okay, yeah, whatever. Like, ultimately, like that might tell me something about your personality, I guess, but there's still just consumption habits, which aren't terribly fascinating. Personally, I think what people do for work typically is more interesting or telling. But yeah, I don't know. It's sad that most people don't have enough
But
free time to
to a
like
degree.
develop, I don't know, a lot of interesting, cool activities. Or
Right.
if not, people are also will typically very much be yearning for those extra activities. Like, oh, I mean, how many times have you met someone, or you yourself are like, man, I wish I could travel more.
Oh, absolutely. Or, you
goddamn,
know,
I'm
you're
pretty sure
even just
everyone
like-
falls in that category. But yeah,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Or like
traveling.
your friend talks about doing something and you're like, oh, I wish I had time for that.
Everybody has something where they're like, oh god, I wish I had time for blah. Like either it's a hobby, traveling, like outdoor activities, sports, some sort of crafts, like even like gaming. I mean, personally, I even like.
I
I mean,
ran out
yeah,
of time
not
for that years ago.
Listen, I mean, you know, we're not going to hate on gamers too hard, but like, you know, I think gaming is it consumption? Yeah, a little bit, but there is at least some interactive element with it.
There
Right.
is.
And even when you are consuming, say, a passive media like a TV show, to go forward and then discuss that with other people and to kind of find deeper meaning in that, there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. We were doing that with The Last of Us for
Definitely.
several weeks.
Exactly.
And absolutely no cap, like before I logged on for book club, I was talking to another friend who just started a degree online degree program, and I'm like, so, you know, hey, speaking of me going and doing untraditional learning, I got to go do book club. My friend's like, man, I miss book clubs. I don't have time for book clubs anymore.
Oh god, I mean, a lot of them, those little hobbies in third places, are just allowing you to explore your own mind and actually be with company you want to be with. That's kind of a huge thing that has been pretty aggressively gutted from the backgrounds.
Yeah.
Like
I
I mean,
intentionally try to do at least a couple of things all the time that have nothing to do with what I do for work, nothing to do with building my marketability in any kind of way, and I just do them because I want to do them and because I think they're fun and because I think they're interesting.
yeah, I mean, for freak's sake, I have my little wargaming stuff. I'm a group that tries to get together once every couple of months. The thing is, it's once every couple of months.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no. Yeah, you hit a certain point in adulthood, and anything that you try to coordinate with people in person is impossible.
Unless you literally have a leash. And
Yeah,
even
like, you have
then,
to brute force
50-50.
it. You have to brute force it.
See, that's where I consider myself lucky that I am basically addicted to disc golf, because everyone else I play disc golf with is also addicted. So we are.
Yeah, back-
Golf is basically
are
a cult.
I mean, sure.
I mean, yeah.
There's no
that's-
leader to it. It's more. I think addiction is actually much more appropriate than cult. I mean, genuinely.
I'm gonna
Honestly,
say, like,
it's not that.
what is it, like spin classes? Like, the people who do it are all about it, and it just it's creepy sometimes.
true. The way I
Honestly,
try to
the-
describe it to people is I say that the number of itches that disc golf scratches is impressive. It scratches the itch to get outside, do hiking, be in nature, play a game, hang out with friends, also be competitive if you're into that. Like, there's just so many itches at once. So, like, I mean, shit, like, I barely even like play video games anymore because I'm just like,
Going
nah,
disc golfing.
yeah, like I'd rather be
Yeah.
outside, and if I want to be competitive, I'd rather be competitive in something I'm good at versus some video game where some like 11-year-old kid is just gonna like wipe the floor with me.
Reminds me of
Scream at you
my
on the
old
voice
freaking
chat.
rock climbing group, because back when I still could, that was we're gonna go out on the weekend pretty much every weekend of the summer until the ice starts forming again.
Exactly. Yeah.
I miss that.
But yeah, no, I think, I mean, like I said, cult is maybe not the correct term because there's no leader to it, but there's
fair. I
definitely
just
a like
say it's
collective
just like
addiction.
yeah.
It's like a collective addiction. That's how I would
This
describe
is
it.
just like the occasionally like creepy reaction people have when you ask them to talk about it, and you're like, wow, that is like a lot more enthusiasm than I was expecting or honestly wanting.
Yeah, no, and I think, like I said, I think from my perspective, it is like the almost like this perfect escape from like capitalist realism, basically.
I would just tie it to still existing passionate communities because they are, and they are very much communities that are kind of
I think that's what it is.
Yeah, and they're just tangentially tied to whatever the required equipment is. The rest of it, you already have the stuff. It's not going to magically deteriorate for decades if maintained.
True. And hey, it could be worse. I could be addicted to like Magic the Gathering, right?
Oh dear.
There are way worse addictions out there than disc golf. way worse
he looks
addictions.
at a pile of Magic the Gathering cards.
Yeah, I didn't mean to call anyone out specifically.
But, no, this is me outing myself on that. You're fine.
I'm also joking because it's like even Magic is even Magic is not the worst addiction you could have.
And again, it has that wildly social aspect of
true.
If somebody has a deck and they see you playing with one, maybe they'll sit down and pull out theirs.
That's true. That is very true.
Also, thank you, my mind.
I know they exist. I know there are Magic collectors that I guess just don't play the game, but I think they're pretty rare.
You know, they
no,
just use it as
there are
an
financial investors that do it. It's gross.
It's not super rare either.
No, it's like really? One out of every 6.
I don't know. I guess I haven't met many people like that. Most people do end up playing with their cards eventually. But I don't know.
Well, like, okay, so I mean, to be fair, I knew a guy, he started out and he played, and then he realized that I guess for a period of time he got a lot more out of like the speculative nature of like
the gambling aspect.
Right. Okay. And then then he turned out to be like a super gross like libertarian fascist anyway, but
we haven't seen any of this before.
I'm just talking about warning signs here.
Well, I guess I'll count myself lucky I haven't run into the weird Magic collectors. It's just most of the friends I have who play Magic are just like, I have hundreds of Commander decks and no one to play Commander with, and I'm like, okay, fine, I guess.
I actually do know a person like that. I love play Commander, but nobody wants to play Commander.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, in that case, I'm like, all right, I actually do kind of feel bad for you, and also even though I'm like, yeah, it's not the best addiction you could have, but it's also far from the worst. If you just want to play card games with someone, like, I get it. I totally get it.
I mean, for frick's sake, there are freeware iterations that you can find to just play and check stuff out online anymore for it. So,
oh yeah, I mean, there's like Magic Arena and stuff, but
yeah,
if you're looking for like the social aspect of in-person card games, that's kind of what I was insinuating. Of like this, that is like a totally different.
People who go to conventions and that's all they do for like 4 days.
Is play Magic. Is
down in the basement where they have all the tabletop gaming tables, and they will just play Magic, or they will just play whatever their tabletop or card game flavor of choices, and like you just don't see them for 4 days, and like probably about halfway through day 2, most people who aren't there specifically for that know better than to go down there because it starts to smell a little.
And this is what the bucket of Febreze is for.
Yep.
Complete with sponge. It is there to remind people bathing is good for your health, yo. And if you need to borrow a shower while at con, go and borrow a shower. Sorry.
I've occasionally not been so shy as to walk up to somebody and be like, bruh, you need to go find a shower.
Here's a bar of soap.
All right,
But anyway,
speaking of buckets
Yeah.
of Febreze,
Chapter 15?
well, yeah, I guess
soon.
we're already getting long in the tooth here, so
Yeah.
let's go over the footnote because it is pretty sick. And I think I don't mind not spending a ton of time on 15.1 because I think
I'm wanting to say
chapter
that even
15
if
will
Harley
come
probably
in.
would have spent like 10 minutes on it.
Yeah, I think chapter 15 will start to come into focus more later once we have more pieces of the puzzle. Yeah, I mean, I guess like it's called the development of machinery. I'd say that's a pretty accurate description of the chapter. It's pretty much just Marx walking through like literally the history of development of machinery in large scale industry. I mean, it's like steam engine stuff.
Like,
how do you
basically
get
like
from
steam engines made it so that we could put machinery anywhere we damn well wanted, and we
Right.
didn't have to worry about horses or water or donkeys or anything like that.
Yeah, and it's this idea where you're moving from like humans being the ones that primarily do every single aspect, or like it's human powered development versus steam powered development. And so this transformation from this workshop full of workers into a factory full of machines. That is what this section is all about. And so, yeah, footnote 4 here. I guess so here's the quick context, right? In 1735, John Wyatt announced the spinning machine and thereby started the Industrial Revolution of the 18th century. He nowhere mentioned that a donkey would provide the motive power instead of a man, yet this is exactly what happened. Or sorry, what actually happened. In his program, it was called A Machine to Spin Without Fingers. Okay, so he puts a footnote there. So let's go through the footnote then. He says, spinning machines had already been used before his time, although very imperfect ones, and Italy was probably the country where they first appeared. A critical history of technology would show how little any of the inventions of the 18th century are the work of a single individual. As yet, such a book does not exist. Darwin has directed attention to the history of natural technology, i.e. the formation of the organs of plants and animals. Also, quick note, actually I double-checked this. I think organs, in a lot of the context that Marx uses it, refers to the same meaning as tools, basically. I think, if I remember correctly, the Latin root is pretty similar or something like that for organ and tool. Anyways, so just if you see organs, just kind of also think like, oh, the tools. Okay. The formation of the organs of plants and animals, which serve as the instruments of production for sustaining their life. Does not the history of the productive organs of man in society, of organs that are the material basis of every particular organization of society, deserve equal attention? And would not such a history be easier to compile, since, as Vico says, human history differs from natural history in that we have made the former, but not the latter? Technology reveals the active relation of man to nature, the direct process of the production of his life, and thereby it also lays bare the process of production of the social relations of his life, and of the mental conceptions that flow from these relations. Even a history of religion, that is written in abstraction from this material basis is uncritical. It is, in reality, much easier to discover by analysis the earthly kernel of the misty creations of religion than to do the opposite, to develop from the actual given relations of life the forms in which they have been apotheosized. The latter method is the only materialist and therefore the only scientific one. The weaknesses of the abstract materialism of natural science, a materialism which excludes the historical process, are immediately evident from the abstract and ideological conceptions expressed by its spokesmen whenever they venture beyond the bounds of their own speciality. All right, so definitely a pretty cool footnote. And actually, I meant to do this, but obviously I did not have time. But that little diagram that David Harvey makes in the video, I will try and reproduce that in a PowerPoint slide at some point, so we can sort of use that potentially to kind of track these sorts of things, like right how you got the relations to nature, which has to do everything with
I actually did draw it out so I can reference it.
Yeah, I think it'll be useful.
Basically, he writes up on the board technology, nature, the process of production or the labor process, reproduction of daily life, social relations, and mental conceptions. And at first he kind of draws them out almost like in this sort of somewhat interacting cycle, where technology connects to nature, nature connects to the process of production connects to the reproduction of daily life, and so on and so forth, to where, you know, everything connects back to technology. But what he ultimately says is start anywhere on this, and the relationship between each of these items, including ones that are not necessarily drawn, you know, adjacent to each other, they each have their own dialectical relationship that exists autonomously as a moment, but also as part of a larger ecology. Which is probably, you know, again, easier to say once you kind of draw it out in front, but the kind of overarching thing is that you've got these sort of 6 concepts that each interact with each other, both as autonomous dialectics, as well as a larger part of an ecology or a larger part of a system, that you have to both look at them as individuals and as part of a larger whole to get the overarching idea of the, I'm going to say, like, what he's trying to talk about as far as machinery and large-scale industry in chapter 15.
Yeah, and I think it's a really excellent example of the materialist dialectic. I mean, he calls it, like, you know, the only materialist and therefore the only scientific one. But, like, it's also obviously extremely dialectical because it is basically a big loop, because you're starting with, like, technology level 1. And let's say, I mean, if we take humans, for example, like, the first technology we spawned in with, so to speak, would be like our hands and feet, or just our bodies, basically, right? Our bodies are like the original technology that we have to start with, and that technology, our body, is our primary means of interacting with nature in order to get our basic necessities to live. The daily reproduction of life. From that daily reproduction of life, we also develop social relations with one another in the process. And from the social relations with other people, we start to get these mental conceptions of how the world works, how society works, how other people work. And then From those mental conceptions, we get new ideas for new technology. And then it comes full circle, and we produce this new technology, we make it, and then the cycle kind of starts all over again. Right now we've got a new technology. Now we interact with nature in a slightly different way. And now our social relations are going to adjust slightly to that. And then our mental conceptions are going to adjust a little bit. And then we're going to come up with some new solutions, some new technology, etc., etc., etc. The loop, this like continual process, is a process of development, right? That's kind of what dialectics is all about. It's this continuous motion. And I think this is like an excellent example of, or excellent way of Marx explaining it in like a pretty easily digestible way.
Right. But the idea is also that it's not necessarily, where you have to start with the technology. You can start anywhere along the chain. True. But also, it's not necessarily that social relations and mental conceptions are only connected to each other. Nature can also alter your mental conceptions of something. Your mental conceptions of something can alter the nature of things. Or, your process, technology can alter your processes of production without necessarily having to directly interact with nature, though there is still perhaps somewhere within that broader ecology the fact that maybe nature had previously interacted with maybe technology that gave you that, so you might have like a 3-piece closed loop in that particular point.
Yeah, and
that
I guess
it's not necessarily, you can't treat it as like one moment in this is supreme and the immediate thing of everything else. You kind of have to, there's almost, I don't even want to say that there's necessarily like a chicken and the egg sort of paradox there. It's literally that it's yes, it's a closed system, but it's not a closed loop.
Yeah, and even calling it a loop is not exactly correct, because actually, if you read it carefully, the way David Harvey draws it isn't even exactly how it's written, right? Because he says that it reveals the active relation of man to nature, which he's sort of saying, in other words, the production of daily life and the production of social relations and the mental conception. So it's, and when he says that flow from those relations, yeah, exactly. Those relations, when he says the mental conceptions that flow from those relations, I think are social and the one to nature. It's both of them.
Yeah. Each of those items connects to everything else in a dialectic relationship, ultimately.
Pretty much, yeah. So I think what he's, in other words, he's basically saying technology tells us a lot about human beings and how they operate, pretty much, and also how they develop over time. Like, you could almost, I guess what he's kind of hinting at is that this is pretty much what evolution is all about, in the, not only like, yes, in the biological sense of like, this is how organisms develop over really long time, to become more specialized and to create new technologies, if you will, in quotes, right? These sort of biological adaptations. He's like, yeah, humans do the same damn thing. It's the exact same process. I don't even think he would say it's like distinct from evolution. This is what evolution looks like in the human species.
Yeah. And it's also kind of maybe kind of a point to bring up that he's probably walking a line here, because it was still kind of a sensitive topic to bring up the fact that humans were animals, and that humans were and are subject to the same types of evolutionary pressures as the animals that Darwin was studying. Because at the time it was still seen as a little bit, both religiously and socially, blasphemous to suggest that humans could be reduced to the same crudeness.
I think you're right.
And I
And
mean,
I also
we
think at
know
the same
now that
time
that's
that
we know
Marx
now
would not
that
have given a
that's
fuck.
false. Yeah, but I feel like he is somewhat tiptoeing that line. You know, he is somewhat still creating division while also saying it's the same thing.
Potentially. I have a feeling Marx was harsh enough on religion that he probably did not care about pissing them off even further. But
On religion, sure, but even among a lot of the non-religious, it was still seen as kind of like
it's like
gross.
the new kid on the block, the new thing. They're like, ew, we're it's the whole like meme of like, we're descended from monkeys, what?
Yeah. Like, you know, to where even a lot of the non-religious people at that point were still probably not fully aware of the influence that religious culture was having on their feelings toward Darwin's theories. Like, it was still not socially
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't even know.
okay to say.
I personally am not super familiar with like the history, like
Because even Darwin was super careful about the way
Right.
that he initially talked about things, because Darwin was religious.
exactly, and I
Um,
also don't remember exactly like, or I don't even. It's not even a matter of remembering. I don't really know, how like the timeline of how Darwin's work was received. Like, was it? I know it wasn't rapidly adopted, but some people were like gung ho about it rather quickly.
yeah.
Like, I think Marx was in that group of like, oh, this dude is on the money. Like,
Yeah.
this is right. And I think Marx felt that way because he said, "Hey, look, it's dialectical materialism."
Right. Yeah, no, I think Marx saw it as sort of a naturalistic example of what he'd already been examining within, shall we say, human nature. But I even feel here that Marx is still sensitive enough to the overall sensibilities of his audience that he creates a very delicate division between Darwin's "hey, this applies to animals" and Marx's "hey, this applies to humans," but creates like this just very delicate link that is not super offensive and allows for just enough distance for the people who aren't necessarily comfortable with that yet to still receive the overall message that he's trying to create, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like that this is actually very delicately constructed to not alienate his audience.
I guess so, and I think his audience is probably fairly scientific minded. Like, he's I think at least in Capital we can safely say he's targeting a very academic audience, right? Someone who would probably be familiar with Darwin's work and how groundbreaking it really was. So like citing Darwin and saying like, "Hey, I'm kind of doing the same thing here, except like he says here, I am including the historical process," right? Yeah, I think it's pretty similar. And actually, this is another thing, by the way, I think is cool. Like an interesting thing to point out is like this, the abstract materialism of natural science. And I think I remember when like back when I was like first getting introduced to a lot of Marxist concepts, like that was one of the things I was wrestling with a little bit, right? Is like, oh, well, how can I guess it was sort of the idea of accepting that Marxism and is like a social science, right? And like what that actually means. So when you call it like, oh, scientific socialism, it's like, oh, what are we talking about? And I mean, the difference between dialectical materialism and abstract materialism, because dialectical is looking at the development of the thing over time, meaning it has to be a historical process, or the historical like part of the analysis is critical, versus abstract, where you sort of set your boundaries. You say like, okay, I don't really care what happens before this certain thing or after this certain thing. I'm only looking at the thing itself, and I'm drawing this imaginary boundary around it and literally abstracting it in order to analyze it more thoroughly. And then I think I kind of came to terms with that when I'm like, wait, that is what I do in all my engineering classes. Like there's literally a word for it. It's called like a control volume, or just controlled variables. They literally are saying, well, we know these variables kind of matter and that things do change over time, but we're not going to worry about that because it makes problems too hard to solve. And yeah, Marx is saying that like, hey, it turns out if you do that, you might be wrong sometimes, especially when it comes to social sciences.
Yeah, although as somebody who's been into that fight, it's like social sciences are absolutely sciences. You just have to do it a little differently sometimes.
Exactly, yeah. And that can, I mean, that's what I mean, right? It can be difficult to sort of, that's another thing that I think, even in the STEM Lord community, you get sort of subtly programmed into thinking that way, right? That like social sciences they're not real science, right? They're not hard science, quote unquote, because they typically include like more historical development and things like that. Like that is unfortunately somewhat ingrained in the STEM training, I feel like, at least in some of the STEM curriculum.
As somebody who's been on both sides, it's super frustrating.
It is, yeah. And then I think, I can't speak as clearly from the social side because I've only taken electives in social sciences, mostly philosophy, because I think philosophy is pretty fun. But I think there is the inverse is also mostly true, right? Where like social scientists kind of give shit to the quote, like the physical sciences crew by being like, oh, they don't understand like human nature or like human behavior at all. Like they're a bunch of code monkeys who don't understand. They have to deal with human beings every once in a while.
So, it's like, and my entire academic life was basically playing both sides. Essentially trying to get the social scientists to understand the lab rats and vice versa. And that's a challenge. And having to do research that touches both is frustrating because you get, the hard science people who are like, your variables are squishy. And I'm like, I absolutely know my variables are squishy, but there's nothing I can do with that because they're full of blood.
Yep. All right. Well, let's keep figuring out chapter 15 next time. I'll stop the recording.